I've been spending a lot of time in a museum. It's not the kind with dinosaur bones or Renaissance art.
Right.
This one is a special collection, a curated exhibit of human gullibility and an enduring tragedy. When you enter the grand hall, hung where everyone can see it, is the most infamous piece.
The main event, so to speak.
Exactly. Let's call it the Mona Lisa of medical lies. It's a study from the late 1990s, beautifully framed, that purports to show this dark, insidious connection between a simple childhood vaccine and autism.
And it's the piece that casts a shadow over everything else.
It really does. As you walk deeper, you pass the mid-century exhibit, a chillingly lifelike sculpture of a woman referred to as the refrigerator mother, a parent supposedly so emotionally cold she literally froze her own child into a state of autism.
It's a horrifying concept.
Just brutal. You turn a corner and there's a whole wing dedicated to dietary monsters and pseudoscience, and then you find the modern installation, the one that draws a shocked crowd and makes your stomach clench.
I know the one you mean.
It's simply a bottle of industrial bleach with detailed instructions for using it as an enema on a child.
Yeah.
The most bizarre and disturbing part of this museum isn't the exhibits themselves, it's that it's still open. In fact, it's constantly expanding and updating its displays. People are in here right now, not as curious tourists, but as students, treating it as a genuine source of medical advice.
And that's the danger.
This is a guided tour we need to take you on because this place, this museum of autism bullshit, has done and continues to do devastating real harm.
It is a deeply disturbing history, but tracing this trajectory of harm is essential for understanding where we are today. Our mission is to move beyond just cataloging the myths.
Right.
We need to understand how blame shifted over the last century from these purely psychological theories that targeted mothers to outright calculated medical and public health failure on a global scale driven by profit.
It's a through line of blame.
It is. We need to follow the thread from that original lie to the very tangible, measurable harm we see in communities and the incredible challenge international health organizations face in fighting this kind of digital age conspiracy.
So let's start with the cornerstone of this entire horrifying collection, the piece that arguably caused the most widespread, lasting damage, that infamous 1998 paper. This wasn't some fringe journal. It was published in The Lancet, a highly respected British medical journal, in February 1998. It was authored by a physician named Andrew Wakefield and 12 co-authors. What exactly did this paper claim to find?
Well, the paper claimed to have identified a new syndrome among a group of 12 children. Wakefield later gave it the name autistic enterocolitis, suggesting a link between the MMR vaccine.
Measles, mumps, rubella.
Exactly. A link between the MMR vaccine, intestinal distress, and the onset of pervasive developmental disorders, including autism. Now, we have to stress this wasn't simply a case of poor methodology or, an honest scientific error.
Yep.
An investigation spanning years later exposed this as pure, calculated fraud.
And the nature of the fraud is so important because it wasn't a subtle mistake. It was brazen.
Not at all. It involved outright data selection and manipulation designed to achieve a predetermined outcome. For instance, the paper claimed that all 12 children were previously normal before receiving the MMR vaccine.
Which is the key to the whole scare, right? That a healthy child gets a shot and then they're not healthy.
Precisely. But later reviews of their actual medical records revealed that 5 of those children had pre-existing documented developmental concerns before they were ever vaccinated.
So the core premise was a lie from the start.
A complete lie. Furthermore, they altered clinical reports. In 9 cases, initial colonic reports were normal. They were changed in the published paper to read nonspecific colitis, magically fitting the narrative of this inflammatory intestinal syndrome he was inventing.
And if you look closer at that exhibit, you see the manipulation of the timeline as well, which is crucial for creating fear. The paper suggested a really tight temporal connection, claiming that parents of 8 children linked the onset of symptoms directly to the MMR vaccine.
Right. They needed that tight window to make the case seem plausible, to make it feel like cause and effect.
Like A happened, then B immediately happened.
Exactly. But the records show that 11 families had made some sort of allegation. Wakefield intentionally excluded the 3 cases that reported the onset of problems in months, stretching well past the vaccination date.
So he just threw out the data that didn't fit.
He threw it out. By removing those outliers, he manufactured the false appearance of a direct 14-day temporal link between the vaccine and the alleged new symptoms.
It just sounds like a scheme orchestrated purely for external, non-scientific reasons. What were the profit incentives? I mean, that's always the question.
And the financial incentives here are what elevate this from, scientific misconduct to calculated public health malpractice. There were two massive, crucial, undisclosed conflicts of interest.
Okay.
The first was legal. Wakefield had been hired by a lawyer who was actively organizing a massive class action lawsuit against the vaccine producers. His research, therefore, was commissioned and funded specifically to provide the necessary scientific evidence for that litigation.
So the research wasn't designed to find truth. It was designed to win a lawsuit.
Precisely. And the second conflict of interest reveals the incredible profit motive.
This is where it gets even worse.
Yeah. Investigative reporter Brian Deere uncovered evidence that Wakefield had been planning a commercial venture that hinged entirely on his findings being validated. He planned to sell diagnostic kits for his non-existent autistic enterocolitis syndrome.
The one he just invented?
The one he just invented. And that venture stood to earn him, personally, up to $43 million a year.
Wow. $43 million.
Per year. And adding to the audacity, he also held a patent for a rival single measles vaccine at the time, meaning he stood to profit directly if the MMR combined vaccine was discredited.
That level of calculation, the litigation, creating a market for a syndrome he invented, and holding a rival patent is why this is the Mona Lisa of medical lies. It wasn't just bad science. It was an act of deception aimed at immense personal gain.
A complete con. But the scientific community, thankfully, didn't let it stand forever.
No, but it took a while.
It did. But the scientific response, when it came, was overwhelming. Scientific bodies globally, we're talking the CDC, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the UK National Health Service, the Institute of Medicine, all conducted massive epidemiological studies.
These are huge studies, right? Not just 12 kids.
Hundreds of thousands of children's records across 3 continents. And they repeatedly and definitively concluded there is no causal connection between the MMR or any other vaccine and autism.
It took over a decade, but the consequences of the fraud finally caught up to the perpetrator.
Yes. In February 2010, the paper was fully retracted by The Lancet.
Which is a huge deal for a journal like that.
It's the nuclear option. And the journal's editor-in-chief, Richard Horton, didn't mince words. He publicly called the paper utterly false. A few months later, Wakefield was found guilty of serious professional misconduct and formally struck off the UK medical register, effectively ending his ability to practice medicine there.
You would hope that such a definitive, globally supported retraction and ethical censure would put the myth to rest, but it didn't. This zombie theory simply refuses to die.
It doesn't.
And that refusal has had devastating, real-world public health consequences.
That is the absolute tragedy. The consequences moved immediately from the academic page to community health. In the UK and Ireland, following the vaccine scare, there was a sharp, measurable drop in the uptake of the MMR vaccine.
People got scared.
They got scared. And this decline directly led to increased incidences of measles and mumps diseases that were largely contained, resulting in preventable deaths and serious permanent injuries among children who should have been protected. The lie was fake, but the sickness and death it caused were frighteningly real.
And this brings us to the modern challenge, the global public health crisis that continues today. We can picture a parent, maybe someone we call Chloe, who is deeply committed to her child's health.
Oh.
She is confronted by an overwhelming volume of conflicting information online. Official health messaging from a national service or the WHO is factual, often dry and distant.
Clinical.
Very clinical. But the misinformation she encounters in private parenting groups, the emotional videos, the personal anecdotes, the fear-driven narratives about toxins, those feel urgent, human, and personal. How does rigorous truth compete with emotionally resonant fiction in that landscape?
It barely competes. That is the core challenge for international health organizations. It's not a lack of data. It's a fight for psychological space. Misinformation is often shared in these communities of trust, which just amplifies its impact.
And we can actually see the results.
We see the clear, measurable result of this public health dilemma in studies, such as the one published in JAMA Pediatrics.
Okay, let's unpack that study because it proves the fear is still active. It's not a historical problem.
Not at all. This was a large, comprehensive study looking at vaccination rates. It found a striking disparity that confirms the ongoing impact of the misinformation. Overall, among the cohort they studied, 94% of non-autistic children had received all recommended vaccines by age 7.
Which sounds pretty good.
It's good, but for children with an existing autism diagnosis, that rate dropped significantly to 84%. That's a 10 percentage point gap in overall protection.
Wow. But when they drilled down to the MMR shot specifically, the one at the absolute center of the original fraud, the disparity must have been even more pronounced.
It was. For the MMR shot, 96% of non-autistic children were vaccinated, compared to only 82% of children with an autism diagnosis.
So that's an 18% gap.
It shows that the original myth, despite being debunked for over 2 decades, still dictates healthcare decisions for at least 18% of families dealing with an autism diagnosis.
And perhaps more worryingly, the study suggested this fear is inherited, or at least it propagates within families.
Yes, that is a key finding showing just how pervasive the anxiety is. The study looked at the younger siblings of autistic children.
Okay.
Even they were significantly less likely to be vaccinated. Only 73% of these siblings received recommended vaccines in the first 11 months of life, compared to 85% of their counterparts without an autistic older sibling.
So the fear spills over to the next child.
It does. This empirical data confirms that the fear sparked by that fraudulent 1998 paper endures and actively prevents families from protecting all their children against serious infectious diseases. It is a persistent, ongoing public health failure rooted in a lie.
Let's exit the modern wing and step back into the mid-century, where the focus shifts from a medical hoax to a profound psychological one. This is the realm of the infamous refrigerator mother sculpture. This theory dominated the landscape for decades, positing that autism was caused not by genetics or biology, but by emotionally distant or cold mothering. It's the original sin of autism blame.
It really is. And this theory traces its origins back to Dr. Leo Kanner, the Austrian-American psychiatrist credited with first coining the term early infantile autism back in 1943.
The person who literally defined it.
The very same. He based this definition on observations of 11 children in his clinic, and while Kanner initially considered there might be a biological basis, he was really struck by the characteristics of the parents.
What were those characteristics he focused on? What did he see?
He described the parents as highly intellectual, success-driven, oriented toward abstraction, and often quite emotionally reserved or cold. He famously noted that, in the whole group, there are very few really warm-hearted fathers and mothers. This focus on parental affect, rather than the child's neurology, became the dominant narrative for decades.
I remember the chilling quote attributed to him in Time magazine, which just crystallized the cruelty of the theory.
Yes, he described these parents as people who just happened to defrost enough to produce a child.
Ugh, that's just...
It's a masterclass in psychological condemnation.
Yeah.
And this idea was then aggressively popularized by influential psychoanalysts, most notably Bruno Bettelheim, who was the director of Chicago's Orthogenic School for Children with Emotional Disturbances.
Bettelheim took Kanner's observation and pushed it to its most damaging extreme. He wasn't just suggesting coldness, he was suggesting an active, subconscious desire for the child not to exist.
That is correct.
Wow.
Bettelheim was convinced the condition was caused by a profound, fundamental lack of maternal love and proper nurturing. In his view, the environment of the cold mother was so devastating that it forced the child to retreat inward into the shell of autism.
And he had that awful quote about it.
He asserted the initiating factor in infantile autism was the parent's wish that his child should not exist, and he often compared the parents of autistic children to the guards of concentration camps he had encountered.
Comparing traumatized mothers to Nazi camp guards, that is an almost unimaginable level of cruelty and blame, especially coming from a trusted professional.
It was. And this created a mechanism by which mid-century psychiatry subjected the mother's entire emotional and psychological life to scrutiny.
A total surveillance of her psyche.
Absolutely. The theory required a scientific, psychological gaze to turn ever inward, relentlessly scrutinizing the mother's bodily and psychic movements, documented through these exhaustive, intrusive case histories.
So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Completely. If a mother expressed anxiety, it was evidence of her emotional unavailability. If she was clinical and detached, it was proof of her coldness. Mothers were often prescribed their own course of treatment or counseling alongside their children, effectively blaming them for a complex neurological condition we now understand to be overwhelmingly genetic.
When you reflect on the long-term psychological damage this caused, a woman being told, often by a trusted professional, that she froze her own child with her emotional distance, it becomes a massive generational trauma.
Oh, for decades.
Decades of a parent's life were spent searching for a cure, not for a neurological difference, but for the psychological wound she was accused of creating.
It established what scholars now refer to as a cultural contradiction surrounding the autism mother identity. Paradoxically, this identity was privileged.
Privileged how?
It was predominantly reserved for educated, white, bourgeois Western mothers, the exact demographic that fit the psychoanalytic profile of the intellectual abstract parent. Yet simultaneously, this mother was subject to extreme scientific and moral regulation. Society demanded she be the essential source of warmth, yet pathologized her as the destructive culprit.
And the most painful systemic aspect of this blame is revealed when you look at who was excluded from the label. There's a powerful account from the documentary Refrigerator Mothers that shines a harsh light on this discrimination.
That account is crucial. A black mother in the documentary recalled being told by medical professionals that her son could not be autistic.
He couldn't be. Why not?
He was instead labeled emotionally disturbed. The reason? As she recalled, she was told she was not white or assumed to be uneducated.
She literally couldn't fit the profile of the cold, highly intellectual, abstract mother.
Exactly. She noted the bitter irony. She couldn't even be a refrigerator mother. This exposes the deep systemic discrimination inherent in the theory. If you didn't fit the high-class white intellectual profile, the one deemed improvable by psychoanalysis, the system simply applied a different, more permanent race or class-based label.
Like mentally retarded.
Often, yes. The blame was universal, but the type of blame, the high-status blame that came with access to treatment, was reserved for the privileged class, showcasing the underlying classist and racist logics at play.
So, whether you were the cold white mother or the emotionally disturbed black mother, you were always the cause. The system ensured the blame never fell on the science or the lack of understanding of the neurological reality.
Ever.
Moving from psychological theories to modern medical quackery, the atmosphere in the next hall, the Chamber of Horrors, is terrifying. This exhibit shows the terrible cost of parental desperation and the depravity of the fraudsters who profit from it. This is the wing containing that bottle of industrial bleach.
This exhibit centers around the miraculous mineral solution, or MS. This solution is nothing more than chlorine dioxide industrial strength bleach.
Just straight up bleach.
Straight up bleach. It was promoted by a former Scientologist named Jim Humble as a universal cure for countless diseases, ranging from malaria and cancer to, critically, autism. This is a profound example of how the desperation for a cure can lend to child abuse.
And the methods of application were beyond barbaric. Forced ingestion, of course, but the most shocking method was administering it as an enema to children. The justification offered by the fraudsters for this practice is truly sickening.
It is. The fraudsters instructed parents to look for ropeworms in the resulting stool. When the children's intestinal linings shed, which is the body reacting to severe chemical burns from the industrial bleach, the peddlers claimed these strips of tissue were the ropeworms being expelled, proof that the autism-causing parasite was being cleansed.
They were witnessing the results of a chemical burn, the sloughing off of their child's internal tissue, and being told it was proof of success. That is profound manipulation.
It is medical gaslighting taken to its most extreme and dangerous conclusion. The source material is unequivocal here. This constitutes child abuse, and forced enemas in particular are explicitly identified as a form of sexual abuse.
Just horrific.
This exploitation, often carried out globally via online networks, served as a brutal, necessary wake-up call regarding the urgent need for international patient protection against charlatans.
In that same wing, we find another dangerous and unproven method that was once highly promoted: chelation therapy. Why was chelation therapy adopted, and why did it pose such a profound danger?
Chelation therapy involves administering drugs that bind to heavy metals to remove them from the body. It's used for legitimate cases of poisoning, like lead toxicity.
Okay, so it has a real medical use.
A very specific one. Its application to autism was based on the debunked premise that autism is caused by mercury or other heavy metal poisoning, often tied back to the false vaccine scares.
So the logic is flawed from the start.
Totally flawed. Since autism is not caused by heavy metal poisoning, the treatment is totally ineffective against the condition itself.
And unlike the dietary myths, the dangers of chelation therapy were not theoretical, they were lethal.
Tragically so. Chelation therapy is highly aggressive and carries severe side effects, including kidney and liver failure. It strips the body not just of perceived toxins, but also essential minerals. We have to pause here to reflect on the ethical weight of this. In 2005, a 5-year-old child with autism in Pennsylvania died as a direct result of chelation therapy being administered by an unlicensed practitioner.
It's easy to read these facts on a page, but when you stop and realize that the desire to cure led to a tragic, preventable death, you have to wonder about the ethics of desperation itself. How did regulatory bodies allow treatments like this to persist for so long?
That tragic incident was a turning point. It exposed a massive regulatory and ethical vacuum. Parents, driven by the desire to save their children, were spending their life savings, often tens of thousands of dollars, and endangering their kids based on false hope sold by charlatans.
Right.
This high-profile death forced institutions to act. The National Institute of Mental Health, the NIMH, subsequently stopped all clinical trials involving chelation for autism, definitively marking it as dangerous and ineffective.
So these high-profile cases of exploitation, the bleach enemas, the chelation deaths, must have fundamentally altered how Western countries view their responsibility toward vulnerable patient populations.
It absolutely was a forcing mechanism. These incidents forced Western countries to slowly but surely develop more robust regulatory frameworks aimed explicitly at patient protection and practitioner accountability against those who profit from medical fraud.
A shift in focus.
A huge shift, away from simply trusting the practitioners or assuming parents could distinguish true science from quackery, towards safeguarding the patients who are most vulnerable due to the complexity and lack of public understanding surrounding the condition. This is a brutal, necessary wake-up call for regulators internationally.
We move from treatments that caused immediate physical death to myths that cause massive financial strain and severe public health harm. The thread running between the bleach enema and the gluten-free diet and all the myths in this section is the parents' belief that they can still control the outcome by eliminating the toxin or the bad food.
That need for control is key.
So, beyond vaccines, what are the modern dietary monsters that continue to circulate widely?
The main dietary myth involves the idea of the leaky gut and the role of peptides derived from gluten, which is found in wheat, and casein found in dairy.
Right, the GFCF diet.
Exactly. The theory claims that these specific protein fragments cross a compromised intestinal lining, the so-called leaky gut, and once in the bloodstream, they act like opioids, affecting the brain and somehow causing or exacerbating autism symptoms.
This sounds incredibly complicated, which ironically often makes a lie more appealing because it gives the illusion of a sophisticated scientific mechanism.
It definitely gives the illusion of sophistication. But the core appeal is that it gives parents something they can immediately do. They can take action. They can control the food environment.
But does it work?
The science, based on multiple robust reviews, including one in 2021, is clear. Reliable studies show that gluten-free and casein-free diets do not treat the core neurological symptoms of autism.
And what about the profit motive here? Wakefield was going to make $43 million selling diagnostic kits. Does the same financial exploitation model exist around these dietary myths?
It absolutely does, and it mirrors Wakefield's intent perfectly. What are the supplement and diet purveyors really selling? They're selling the idea of a secret cure, a hidden variable that mainstream medicine missed.
And it's expensive.
Incredibly expensive. Adhering to a GFCF diet requires specialized, marked-up foods and supplements. Furthermore, the industry is built on selling parents specialized, often unnecessary, diagnostic testing for food sensitivities, digestive enzymes, all of it.
So it's a whole cottage industry.
A huge one. These products and tests frequently cost families thousands of dollars annually, serving the exact same model of financial exploitation and false hope we saw with Wakefield's planned diagnostic kits.
Moving on from diet, another area of confusion concerns common medications, specifically Tylenol or acetaminophen. There have been claims that consumption during pregnancy causes autism.
This is a classic, pervasive example of conflating link with causation. Some initial observational studies did note a slight statistical association between prenatal acetaminophen use and a later autism diagnosis.
But correlation is not causation.
It is not. And the key to debunking this myth lies entirely in the methodology of the rigorous studies that followed.
That's where the importance of the sibling study comes in, right? We need to slow down and explain why comparing siblings is the methodological gold standard here.
Exactly. When you look at the general population, you can find a link. But autism is highly inherited, with genetic factors accounting for up to 91% of risk.
So genetics is the huge confounding variable.
It's the biggest one. The best way to control for that massive underlying genetic risk, which is shared between siblings, is to perform a sibling comparison study. Researchers conducted a study in Sweden on 2.5 million children and did just that.
So the key question is, if one child who developed autism was exposed to Tylenol prenatally, and the sibling who did not develop autism was also exposed to Tylenol prenatally, what does that tell us about the drug?
It tells us the drug is likely not the primary causative factor. When researchers compared siblings who were differentially exposed to Tylenol in utero, Controlling for that shared familial and genetic environment, the observed link disappeared.
It just vanished.
Entirely. The core insight is that parents who have a genetic predisposition for neurodevelopmental differences, or who have older children with these differences, may simply be more likely to take acetaminophen during pregnancy due to existing conditions or stress.
So the Tylenol isn't the cause, it's a co-occurring factor or an indicator of something else entirely, the underlying family genetics.
Precisely. If you fail to account for that shared genetic predisposition, you falsely implicate the medication.
And then we pivot to the myths fueled purely by technological anxiety, the electron hall.
Ah, yes. The ubiquitous fear of modern electromagnetic fields, or EMF. This includes claims about Wi-Fi, 5G networks, and general cell phone radiation causing autism. These claims are fundamentally non-falsifiable and prey heavily on general technophobia.
The feeling that modern technology is making us sick. What does the basic physics and biology tell us about these claims?
They are biologically baseless. Scientifically, the radiation emitted by cell phones and Wi-Fi towers is non-ionizing radiation.
And what does that mean?
Non-ionizing radiation simply lacks the energy to damage DNA, break chemical bonds, or fundamentally alter cells in a way that could cause a complex neurodevelopmental condition like autism. There is zero evidence supporting the link, yet the fear remains incredibly strong.
And what about the highly confusing term virtual autism, linking excessive screen time to the condition?
That term is misleading and dangerous because it incorrectly conflates fixable environmental delays with a lifelong neurological condition.
So screen time can cause issues.
Oh, absolutely. Excessive screen time can absolutely cause developmental, speech, and social delays in young children, especially those under 2. These are real, documented setbacks, often remediable by reducing screen time and increasing social interaction.
So it's not autism.
It is not autism. Autism is a complex, pervasive neurological difference rooted in genetics. Using the term virtual autism confuses fixable environmental factors with innate pervasive neurological differences, and it just causes unnecessary alarm among parents.
Let's pivot now to the crucial data point that measures the real-world success of this misinformation. All of these narratives, especially the vaccine fraud, had a dramatic, measurable impact on public behavior. We saw a huge spike in media coverage around 2007.
That surge in media coverage was pivotal because it acted as a massive amplifier for already discredited claims. Starting around 2007, U.S. media coverage surged, largely driven by high-profile vaccine court cases and the highly visible advocacy of celebrities like Jenny McCarthy.
Right, on platforms like The Oprah Winfrey Show.
Extremely popular platforms, yes.
The numbers visualize this amplification. News coverage on the vaccine autism link just spiked dramatically on major U.S. networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. From 2001 to 2006, the average was only about 10 stories per year. In 2007, it jumped fourfold to 44 stories, and in 2008, it exploded, hitting 105 stories.
And this rapid increase in volume had a disproportionate effect because, despite the fact that major scientific bodies had already thoroughly refuted the claim by 2007, the vast majority of this television coverage failed to explicitly or definitively refute the claim.
They presented it as a debate.
They broadcast misinformation framed as a two-sided debate, giving the false claim massive, undue legitimacy in the public mind.
And the economic analysis confirms this misinformation changed behavior among those who are most susceptible to the fear.
Yes. Researchers compared vaccination rates among parents deemed most sensitive to autism risk, which they defined as parents of firstborn boys whose mothers were aged 30 or older, against least sensitive parents.
And what did they find?
The findings were stark and empirical. The surge in misinformation caused susceptible parents to become 3.3 percentage points less likely to administer the MMR shot by the CDC's recommended age of 15 months. This delay persisted, resulting in a 4.1 percentage point reduction in take-up by 29 months of age.
A 4 to 4.5% reduction in uptake among this group is deeply significant in public health terms. That's not just a statistic, that's a failure to achieve herd immunity.
Absolutely. Researchers estimate that even a 5% decline in MMR coverage nationally could potentially result in a threefold increase in annual measles outbreaks. This empirical evidence is the final measurable outcome of the museum tour. Easily verifiable false information, when spread through major media channels, directly and severely impacts public health behavior, leading to preventable illness and death.
After touring this museum of fear, blame, and fraud, we have to pivot decisively and ground ourselves in the scientific reality. What is the evidence-based modern understanding of autism causation? Where does the science stand today?
The science is overwhelming and definitive. Autism is a neurodevelopmental difference. It is largely caused by genetics, with heritability estimated robustly between 64% and 91%.
That high.
That high. It involves fundamental changes in brain development that happen very early in life, often prenatally or soon after birth. While certain environmental factors like advanced parental age or maternal health during pregnancy can play a role, they almost exclusively interact with an already present genetic predisposition.
So there's no single cause.
There is no single autism gene, but rather a complex interplay of hundreds of genes. And crucially, there is no smoking gun vaccine or environmental toxin responsible.
If the cause is largely genetic, why are diagnosis rates so much higher now than they were 50 years ago? It can't just be the result of the persistent fear, can it?
It is not a result of new cases emerging from vaccines or a sudden surge in environmental toxins. The increase is overwhelmingly due to improved diagnostic practices, awareness, and societal recognition.
We just got better at seeing it.
Much better. We have fundamentally expanded the diagnostic criteria, the spectrum, to include individuals who would have been misdiagnosed with conditions like intellectual disability or emotional disturbance in the past. We have better screening tools, and clinicians are far better at identifying individuals who were previously missed entirely, especially girls, adults, and minorities.
So we are not making more autistic people. We are finally noticing and diagnosing the ones who have always been there, allowing them to access support.
Precisely. And this shift in understanding, from viewing autism as an acquired external tragedy to recognizing it as an innate neurodevelopmental difference, is where the neurodiversity movement steps in, providing a vital counter-narrative to the entire history of blame we just toured.
The neurodiversity movement fundamentally challenges the assumption that autism is a disorder that must be fixed.
That's its core mission. The neurodiversity movement is a 21st century response to the decades-long legacy of psychological and medical blame. Historically, autism was viewed as an undesired difference, a tragedy, or a puzzle that needed solving. The movement challenges this medical model, advocating instead for the acceptance and understanding of autism as a viable, different way of being in the world with its own strengths and challenges.
This resistance to pathological blame isn't entirely new there. Even during the peak of the refrigerator mother theory in the mid-20th century, parents were mobilizing. They were resisting the systemic blame.
They were active, yes, but they often had to organize under the language of the day. For instance, in 1957, mothers in Toronto helped found the Ontario Association for Emotionally Disturbed Children.
Using the language of the problem to fight the problem.
Exactly. Even when their children were defined in pathologizing terms, a reflection of the psychiatric model, these mothers organized and challenged the prevailing custodial forms of care by demanding short-term rehabilitative treatment. Their actions were a grassroots resistance against the psychological abandonment caused by the refrigerator mother theory.
But the profound conceptual shift is really highlighted by the mothers who began to write back using their own voices. Think of women like Clara Park Claiborne, whose book The Siege was published in the same year as Bettelheim's deeply harmful book, The Empty Fortress.
Her first-person narrative was revolutionary because it introduced and modeled the concept of pedagogic care.
Pedagogic care, what does that mean?
It was a profound conceptual shift. Pedagogic care meant you weren't trying to stamp out a disease or undo a psychological wound. You were engaging with a different learning style and a different way of communicating. Park described intensely learning from her autistic daughter, Ellie, rather than seeking to fix her.
Wow.
She noted that Ellie used music, a leitmotif, to communicate her ideas rather than spoken language, and that the appropriate response was to meet Ellie where she was.
So the approach was grounded in rigorous observation, acceptance, and learning from the child's difference, seeking evidence-based support rather than perpetuating stigma or blame. It shifts the entire conversation from cure to support.
Precisely. This shift in perspective, from viewing the autistic child as a victim of bad parenting to understanding them as a whole person with a different culture or a different way of communicating, is the pathway out of the museum bullshit. The goal is recognizing the inherent worth of the individual and shifting the focus from constantly finding a cause, the subsequent blaming, to creating supportive, accepting, and truly accessible environments.
Our tour of the Museum of Autism bullshit underscores just how comprehensive and enduring misinformation can be, spanning nearly a century, from Kanner's psychological blame to Wakefield's financial fraud to the modern digital era of bleach enemas and dietary monsters.
It's a long, dark history.
It is. These myths endure in large part because they offer the false comfort of control. They provide an emotionally satisfying narrative, a simple bad guy to blame, whether it's a cold mother, a vaccine, or an iPhone, instead of accepting the complex, frustrating, and largely unchangeable genetic reality of neurodiversity.
It is intellectually and emotionally easier to have a villain, a toxin, a bad doctor, a cold parent, than to grapple with genetic randomness and complexity. But this desire for a simple, controllable narrative comes at a devastating cost to public health and the emotional and financial well-being of vulnerable families. The journey through this history only reinforces the necessity of critical thinking, the unwavering reliance on rigorous science, and a firm commitment to accepting neurodiversity for what it is, a part of human variation, not a puzzle or a tragedy that requires a cure.